Hello, everybody. Welcome to Project SIP. My name is Jake. I will be the moderator this evening, and I am here with Hannah, Jules, Amanda, and Kylan. Tonight, we are going to be discussing the intersection of religion and politics and its benefits and hindrances on society throughout time. Before we dig into that, I would like to hand the speaking rights off to Amanda for a moment to pay respects.
So I'm assuming everybody knows by now that Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the Supreme Court passed away this past week. She was 87 years old. She was a giant in the legal community, not just for people on the left, but for all women and minority and marginalized communities whose rights she fought for, not just on the Supreme Court, but throughout her career as an attorney for the ACLU, and just laying the groundwork for a lot of the rights that we have today that we take for granted, that we don't really even realize were fought for. And I think it was interesting to learn that she passed away on the evening or on the eve of Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year. And one of the things that I learned this weekend was that there is a belief in the Jewish faith that somebody who passes away on the New Year, or on the eve of the New Year, has, and I'm going to get this wrong, and I apologize to the Jewish community, but it was something along the lines of, they are greatly favored in God's eyes. They're, an important person. And so I thought that was poignant, that was when she passed. I also learned that in the Jewish faith, when somebody passes away, you don't say rest in peace. You say, may their memory be a blessing. So thank you, Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Thank you, Amanda. That was excellent and beautifully said. I'd like to start our conversation tonight in pre-modern society and talk about how religion and politics often serve very similar goals, both providing components that contribute to and encourage the peaceful functioning of society, both creating systems of control. Given this relationship, Hannah, I'm curious, was religion necessary to the development of society as we know it?
No, I don't believe that religion is necessary to the developing of society. I believe it's a tool that is used to control the power that arises and is available when groups of people come together by language.
Jules, I think you wanted to jump in and respond to that as well.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Absolutely. In pre-modern society, religion and politics served essentially to the same goal, in that they both provided components that contribute to and encourage the peaceful functioning of a society. You can think of them both as systems of control in that regard. Given that relationship, was religion necessary to the development of societies as we know them?
I mean, if you go back far enough, very likely. You could say that religion, in terms of an explanation of the world, sort of directed society. People who the gods created, the plants and the animals on Earth, and that created a system of belief in which everybody could coalesce around and become within agreement with each other. And it made a system where people had an explanation for the things that they could not explain. So I think, especially in early human society, it was very important. So yeah, in terms of history, absolutely.
Amanda, I think you were looking to respond to that as well.
Yeah, so I agree with Jules. So I'm one of these weird Catholics who believe in science. And I often like to say that religion is just the human way of understanding, science and vice versa. Science is a way that religious people can understand their belief in God. And so I think that ties back to early humans and the fact that, we see so many different cultures across the world that developed some sort of belief system in creation or the divine, whether it's, indigenous people or, the Japanese pantheon, the Roman pantheon, the Greek pantheon, druids, the, gods of nature. And then, of course, you have your monotheistic religions that believe in one big God, so to speak. And, it was a way to understand like what it means to be human and your place in the world. And when societies are forming and people are deciding hierarchies within, their own communities, I can understand how religion might play an important role in terms of structuring that based on those belief systems.
Excellent. You guys did some fantastic responses. And excellent to get a hat trick on the first question. Kylan is interested in responding here as well.
Well, definitely great points brought up by Jules and Amanda. You definitely, if you go back, throughout history, the earliest days of man to the cradle of civilization in Africa, and as, the tribes of peoples migrated throughout the world, and as the continent separated, you're going to find, contents of religion. You're going to find artifacts. You're going to find writings. You're going to find belief systems. And so, from a historical perspective, I truly do think that they had, an enormous amount of sway and importance in the formation of early society. But as in anything in life, it's all about balance, because you could also trace back to the same lineage with religion, also as sources of conflict and chaos. And so I think, like anything in life, whether it's wealth, whether it's money or power, and especially with religion, all things can be good when they're done in moderation. And so when the intersection of politics and religion or society is skewed more towards the religious state, it could be just as much a hindrance and, a source of chaos and violence, as any other danger to a society.
So
Go for it. No, please.
I would just reply to a few things that have been said, or maybe to expand a little bit on my own, is that it has been found in various cultures, societies, and anthropological evidence that different communities have evolved without the use of religion in their lives. That there has been studies done that show evidence of that not being a necessary component to be able to develop societies. So although I totally agree that societies develop with religion, I don't think it's necessary. And I think it clearly was the case in ours. And I think that has a lot to do with, I think religion's success has a lot to do with its willingness to capitalize on the power that's available to be used and to move forward the agendas of their beliefs.
So I have a question about that. So when we're talking about societies developing without religion, is that developing without organized or structured religion or well-defined religion? It kind of is a little silly, but what's coming to mind for me as I watched Moana the other night, and they talk about Maui, the demigod, and they did their research in making that movie, but I was thinking about indigenous cultures and how it wasn't always just religion, or it wasn't structured. It was storytelling to understand the world, and characters that took on, the designation of divine, essentially, and through folklore and, oral traditions, became, in a sense, religion, but it wasn't, we're going to have this structured thing necessarily. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. Of course, there's a variety of the in-betweens of cultures that believe in one God or in multiple, or they themselves are, and all the things that they see have it within them. But there's this concept that really creates a separation between those societies that are good with, they work within themselves and within their own like ways of observing reverence to creation. And then there's others that believe in what's called a moralizing high gods, where gods, where there's this greater
Moral authority,
yeah,
or
exactly.
traditional monotheism.
Right, more so what cultures in modern day times, like in America with Christianity, believe that that there's this higher being that expects and has a higher way of morality that only we can obtain by way of following that particular path, as if you cannot have a high or the highest morality yourself without that influence. So I think what really matters when we, or a unique separation here, we're not talking about religion and politics and religion per se. Any Aboriginal tribe or group of people that does not prioritize moralizing high gods, is that religion is more of the it's more of the implication of the power and of the way and of the getting people to be joining it, and it's like the greater movement versus the belief system that people hold. And a belief system people hold can be super personal and not involve those around them or the greater world at large. But the religion that they ascribe to has a greater purpose and plan and agendas. And that is what we see enacting in politics pretty heavily. And that is what infringes on people's rights when they disagree with that particular religion.
Like, anybody have anything they'd like to respond before we move on to the next question here? Because that was all really juicy.
I'm kind of thinking about how we're defining the word necessary in your original question. You know, was it necessary, or, you know, is religion necessary to have a thriving society? Is it necessary to have a world superpower? Is it necessary to develop industry or innovation, especially in, you know, early times? And I was thinking about, you know, the Greeks and the Romans and how a lot of their kind of social structure and social hierarchy involved recognition of authority for people who were priests or priestesses of certain temples dedicated to certain gods. And that became such a big component of their culture and their society, and how they structured how their communities functioned. And I think it's a little bit different than what we end up seeing throughout history in terms of theocracies or monarchies, where religion becomes so intertwined with politics and with the ruling class and governance that they're indistinguishable.
That's a very nice point, Amanda, and I just wanted to just buttress that really quickly, especially when we talk about early cultures such as the Greeks and the Romans. You know, I would be remiss to just point out the fact that those societies, you know, and their complexities, their belief systems, their value systems, their very architecture was actually stolen and copied from Northern Africa, in Egypt, or that case known as Kemet. And so, you know, just, you know, for the record is that, you know, even the very religions, you know, that they practiced in the early days can be emanated back, you know, from African tribes and African civilizations. I don't, and just to answer the specific question, do I think that religion was quote unquote necessary for a thriving society? In my humble opinion, I don't think that religion is necessary for a thriving society. I don't think it would be totally necessary for any sort of. I think it can be an add to society, You know, I don't think it was necessary then, and I certainly don't think that it's necessary now. And I definitely look forward to, as we go throughout our broadcast tonight, that we could actually talk more about how, religion is serving in our modern society and our modern politics. But I just wanted to definitely answer your question on that one.
So to respond to Amanda's query about how I meant the word necessary, what I had in my mind was there a period of time where we could not have made the steps we made without it? And I think you could absolutely apply the same idea to today. Are we at a point where we would benefit from religion in politics, or is it a hindrance to progress? And we don't have to necessarily dig into that blindsided subject, but I wanted to clarify exactly what I had in my mind. And I think Jules wanted to jump in with a response to what we've been talking about.
Right. Okay. So to that point, I feel like religion and faith within politics did have its time. I think within history, societies were created, communities were created that were only could have existed because of a way of thinking that people had within a given area. So if you take the cultures of any given country, they have derived from a society in the past, go however distant you want, and that culture was built up, and they were built up to a large degree by faith. Faith in monotheistic, polytheistic. If you go further than that, their societies have been built and continue to thrive because of religion, because of mythology and ideology within a faith-based form of thinking. If the question is, does it have a place now in modern society? Well, no, not so much anymore. I think the basis of society, absolutely. I think our societies and our in the way we've been built up and the way we've come together are largely due to religion in the past. I think now is a time where we can move past that and understand that it's fact-based, and we understand things better. We don't need to say, well, there was a hurricane, but it was the act of God. No, we know why hurricanes happen. We know why an earthquake happens. We don't need this deity to explain why we have it.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that societies in general in the past, before we had that method of scientific thought, before we had the understanding, I think societies would not have existed without faith and religion.
I would reply to that.
Please do.
I do agree that there was a time where religion had a place that supported the societies. Particularly when we think about this moral high ground, that if you have a society that is growing in such a way where you're having trouble controlling the bad behaviors, and if the thought is, or the belief is, that threatening with a deity that can see all and hear all and know all that you're doing, then it is totally having a big brother behind you. I think there was likely a really significant time where that was the best idea yet. So similar to what Jules was saying, I believe there definitely were times where, before certain knowledge of how the world works, that's what we did. And now that we have more knowledge about how the world works, we can evolve our belief systems. So I don't think it's necessary now. And I do believe that there are societies that didn't have it, grew without it, and that it wasn't necessary for them. I think a question is, what alternative could have happened if not for threatening with that larger deity power? What other methods were there for society to implement to help guide their citizens, their communities to do better together?
I think so when you were talking about like Big Brother and the overarching authority, the first thing that came to mind for me was Santa Claus and like Elf on a Shelf, which is like the creepiest thing. I mean, we already know like he sees you when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake, and now he has a snitch. So like
Why does he need a snitch?
That's what I was thinking initially. When you were just now talking about, what would it look like if we don't have that? And I was thinking to myself, a lot of our conversations about religion end up being very Christian centric. And I think, and I mean that just across the board, because that is the majority of religious folks in the United States. But I'm thinking about, Judaism, I'm thinking about atheism or agnostics or people who are just spiritual, or people with indigenous religions, or, nature-based religions, and how they don't necessarily have that overarching, patriarchal God watching their every move and punishing them for wrongdoing. And they had thriving cultures before Europeans screwed it up. They had, or just even in families that aren't Christian, you don't necessarily, there's no correlation between a belief in this one particular Christian or even Abrahamic God and, good behavior from children, or a happy marriage, or being a good person. So I agree with kind of what you're saying about that, and what would it look like. I think we can kind of get a microcosm of that by looking outside of the Christian lens, essentially.
Yeah, and you brought up patriarchy, that Christianity really supports patriarchy, and that has been a very holding hands in history kind of thing. And the ins and outs of what it's done for our society, as far as keep women oppressed, for one, that's a nick against it in my book. And it definitely leads me to consider what other ways are there where they didn't have to do that to half of their population.
And that kind of makes me think of, so we had a Facebook comment from someone named Ray, and it says, how would there be belief without similarity? The same as human form is a common denominator. And I'm not sure how to actually answer the question, how would there be belief without similarity? But it brings to mind the fact that a lot of deities, even monotheistic ones, are typically depicted as human or human in form, and often male. And then they become kind of that overarching authority. And even in religions where you may have female deities, they're not number one. Hera is not number one to Zeus, right? Like it's, you don't have that kind of female centric authority figure who punishes people. And maybe this is my ignorance. There could be some religion I'm completely unaware of throughout history that had that. But I feel like a lot of times when we're seeing these, patriarchal religions or religious figures that have, a focus on punishing or watching or enforcing behavior, we see that it takes on that human patriarchal form. And I mean, even in Christianity, we say God the Father, right? It's the father figure.
Thank you, Ray. That was a really excellent question and fantastically well responded to, at least in my opinion. It's always a little bit hard to be sure we're nailing quite what the question was asking, but I thought that was pretty good. While we're on the topic of questions from the community, I'd like to field one from Daniel. Daniel asks, it sounds like Jules is making the point that religion served a purpose of taking away from some sense of fear of the unknown. So as we understand more about the world, there seems to be less unknown, but as long as death exists, then what comes after will be permanently unknown. Does that mean that there will always be a place for religion? And I think Kylan wanted to take the response to this, but since the question was about something Jules said, if you'd like to respond afterwards, please do.
Absolutely.
Jules, feel more than welcome to go first on that.
That works too.
Okay. Sure. So yeah, I think as long as people have a fear of death, as long as people have a fear of the unknown, I think there will always be, in some form, religion in the world. I don't think religion will ever truly die or go away. I think people, as we become more evolved in terms of our knowledge of how the world works and how things change and how things actually work, I think less and less people will be gravitated towards the intellectual idea or towards the theological idea of religion and God as maybe a singular patriarchal entity or as an organized idea in terms of like Christianity, Judaism, etc. But I think as long as we don't know what's going to happen, I think there's always going to be somebody who says, well, maybe it's going to be this, maybe it's going to be that. And I don't think there's anything intrinsically wrong with that. Yeah, I think there will always be religion. I think there is a permanent unknown that we don't know about, and very likely it's nothingness. And that's a hard pill to swallow. I think people are always going to react to that in a way. Yeah,
this is why I want to be
nobody
crouched
wants to think.
frozen.
Yeah, nobody wants to think about that. No one wants to think about it. It's just, it's human nature to avoid the like thought or comprehension of death in general. We don't do it. We live our lives knowing that in the back of our heads that we could die at any moment, get hit by a car or whatever. I mean, there's so many ways that we could perish. But we are very adept at completely ignoring that thought in the back of our heads. But as long as it's there, there's always going to be somebody who's saying, well, what if it's really nice afterwards? And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that intrinsically, as long as it's not being imposed on other people's ideas of what that means.
Nice. That's a great take on that, Jules. For me, I'm gonna flip it a little bit, because there's definitely a human nature of fear of the unknown where religion has a place, but I'm gonna take it to a more basic and a more raw and a more tribal place for the need for religion, and that's for power. Religion has been used and currently is used for power, to control minds, to control actions under a centralized guise to bring about a desired effect. A movie that comes to mind that really brings this home for me, by the way, I thought it was a great movie. It was The Book of Eli. I thought that was an amazing movie. And the weapon that he was talking about wasn't a gun, it wasn't a missile. The weapon was a book. The book was power, and it was the Bible. And it was the only one that was left in the world. And that the ability to read from that book and take those words and read it to those people and give them something to believe in, at the same time, to have their minds in the palm of his hands. It was worth all of his men being dead. It was worth murdering. It was worth killing. It was worth raping and pillaging and torturing to get a hold of that book because it's power. And when you equate that, and you look across the country in American society, in the past, but especially now, that's what you see. You see, a majority of white evangelical Christian males in Southern Confederate states that are able to use the Bible and religion to dictate to people what they can do with their lives. And the reason why, actually, if you look at the numbers, why evangelical Christianity has actually been on the decline over the decades is because of the rank hypocrisy of the evangelical movement. When you have preachers preaching of morality and sexuality, and behind closed doors, they're coming out as homosexuals, which I have no problem with that, but just don't preach against it and then go behind closed doors and have sex with men or have sex with little boys and little girls or cheat on your wives with hookers. Don't be an evangelical Christian in Congress or in the Senate and say abortion is wrong. There should be no exceptions for rape or incest for rape. But then you have people like the congressman in Tennessee, who was a doctor, who went and had multiple affairs and mistresses with his patients and then forced them to get abortions. So, don't say that you're for, that your Bible teaches you to be moral, when at the same time, when you look at the preachings of Jesus of love thy neighbor, clothe and feed the hungry, wash the feet of the poor, the modern teachings of Jesus are seen nowhere in modern today's conservative politics or politics in general, because we don't take care of the poor, we vilify them. We don't feed the hungry, we cut food stamps and we cut food aid. We cut heating oil assistance for people where they freeze to death in their homes. So if Jesus were alive today and went to a rally in most of the country, he would be booed off stage. He'd be called a dirty hippie, and he would, Jesus is the original refugee. He's the original asylum seeker, and they would chain him up and throw him in a cage and call him a dirty illegal immigrant hippie. And so that's, for me, that's where religion and politics comes nowadays. It's rank hypocrisy, and is used to keep powerful men, predominantly heterosexual, male, Caucasian men, in positions of power to control the masses.
Yeah, I completely agree. I wrote on my
Same.
notepad here, power, and I circled it. And you see this just throughout history. You see this in, the Catholic Church and its history, in terms of how, just for example, empires across Europe expanded with kind of what I'm going to call the advent of mainstream Catholicism, hundreds of years ago, starting with Constantine. You had, eventually went to the Holy Roman Empire. You had a lot of hypocrisy even back then with, popes having affairs and people having to pay to get their sins forgiven with what we called indulgences, which ultimately led to, Martin Luther's 99 Thesis and the Great Schism that created a lot of the denominations in Christianity that we see today. All of that had to do with power, corruption, money, abuse of power, and that hasn't really changed throughout history, especially when, wherever you are in the country, when there's a majority religion, or wherever you are in the world, when there's a majority religion, like we see abuses, of women and of people who are LGBT in Saudi Arabia or in more Muslim majority countries where the political class focuses on enforcing those religious beliefs. There's nothing inherently wrong with different religious beliefs, or any religious belief, I don't think. The problem is when you use it for your own desires, your own needs, your own wealth, your own greed, to control people, to gain more power for yourself, and then to marginalize or eliminate people who you don't like or you don't think are good enough. The Spanish Inquisition, the Holocaust. I mean, Hitler wasn't actually religious, but it's the same sort of patriarchal power and corruption that threads through it all. And it's something that, religion, for those of us who believe it can be a beautiful thing. But like kind of we talked about on the last podcast, communism is great on paper, and then you get people involved and it gets completely messed up and it becomes really horrible in the wrong hands. And that's what, we see a lot of times in the United States with politicians who are typically on the right end of the spectrum these days, usually identifying as Republicans, who they get in power and they want to impose their beliefs while not actually, or at least for some of them, not actually practicing those same things that they're trying to enforce on other people. They're not practicing what they preach in essence, or they're only focusing on, the issue of abortion or the issue of gay marriage, while casually ignoring, the fact that Jesus, if he's coming back, he's probably an asylum seeker at the Mexican border. You know, he's in ICE detention. He is, you know, the homeless man on the street who Karen turns her nose up to and calls the police on because she doesn't like that he exists. And so it's, you know, and then she goes to her small group and she prays and she, you know, says, oh, well, you know, what you do for the least among us, you do to me. But she doesn't actually help people. And I'm ranting now, but like, that's where it all boils down to for me with the way politics and religion have intersected in our modern society, is that we are not free from that corruption that we saw with the Spanish Inquisition and indulgences. It's just changed a little bit. It's still there, but it's just changed.
Excellent points, Amanda. Really excellent. I think Hannah wanted to respond to a couple of things she's been hearing.
Yeah, I think something that we all know the importance of definitions, and that religion and then the ways that it's used in our world is complex. There are many people that have beliefs that follow religious doctrine, and there are many people that hold beliefs that are not a full composite of what a specific religious doctrine says away. So people have a variety of things that they ascribe to and follow or believe. Some people believe out of conviction. Some people follow religion based on the society around them and what they impose and say is the way and must be the way you live your life. So, the difficult reality is that we have the term religion that is really, it's a tool that the people in power can use to set ways of conduct for the population, and those turn into the population's assumed moral values. And in that capacity, anyone holding those positions of power over different groups, this being religious groups, has significant power to change and adapt the future in societies, definitely in politics. So it's definitely different than, it's a different animal altogether compared to an individual that has grown up with certain beliefs about the way the world works and the way that they choose to spend and have their lives go. And that difference is significant, and I think it is a factor that really washes some of the reality away from what we all need to see. You can have beliefs, of course, and you can raise your family with the beliefs that you hold. And what is the struggle that we're all facing is, well, of course, not everybody's beliefs are going to be shared. So how can we create governance that respects everybody's beliefs, doesn't infringe on them, but also doesn't prioritize them to the point of infringing on non-believers or people that are just different than them. So there really must be a separation between recognizing religion used as a power tool and religion as a belief system that people hold in themselves through their own convictions.
Before we,
Damn.
there's so much great stuff has been said, and I'm a little stymied because we've actually gotten into some of the questions we're going to get to. So we might go back a little bit just so you guys know, but that's okay.
That's okay.
The next thing I want to talk about is how the relationship between religion and politics tends to play out in one of three or so forms. Political authorities can control religious institutions. Religious leaders can prescribe to political authorities, and or there can be something of a symbiotic relationship between the two. As an open question, because I don't think there's going to be too much to dig into here, which of these three do you guys think serves the people the best?
I think it's the symbiotic coexistence. I think anytime that we've seen political authorities controlling religion, it suppresses religion. Anytime we've seen religious leaders controlling politics, I mean, I guess there are some good examples of monarchies, but we don't really hear about those these days because they're not functional, really. They have parliaments and things like that. But when you have in history religious leaders who run politics, you get suppression of people who don't believe the same as them. The examples for those two things that come to mind are, in China, we have the Uyghur Muslims who, that's a society where the government doesn't want any religion. And you have a religious minority, they're a ethnic minority, and they are being subjected to genocide. And the term is escaping me, but it's the erasure of their culture and their beliefs. And that's because of a political authority that is able to control religious belief and religious institutions. And it's not just the Uyghur Muslims that, the Chinese government has gone after Christians reading their Bibles in secret basements, and so that is something that I don't want. And then, of course, you have the whole reason why America basically exists. The colonialism that we had often started with people escaping religious persecution in Europe, specifically England, because of the head of the state was the head of the church. And sometimes that was the Anglican Church, and sometimes the Queen or the King was Catholic, and they were hating on and murdering each other, and people left and found a new world. And I'm putting that in quotes because people were already living and thriving here. But I don't think that those two types of relationships really work for communities. It should be a symbiotic relationship. It should be the situation where, you drive around your neighborhood and you see a Sikh temple, you see, the mosque, you see a church, you see a community center where everyone is welcome, regardless of belief or non-belief. You see, places where people who have every belief or any belief or no belief can gather and support each other and respect each other's beliefs, and a political system that allows for that respect and supports that respect through policies or lack thereof.
Jules, I think you were looking to respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, to the point that can politics and religion have a symbiotic relationship, I don't believe they can. If you want to go back, and many religions have existed separate from politics in many large ways. I mean, they were tied into a large degree. But if you want to look at the primary religion in the world today, Christianity, it was imposed by Emperor Constantine on his deathbed as a system of control. He understood that if the Roman citizenship was going to worship multiple gods, and all of them different gods, Dionysus over here, Jupiter over here, it's really hard to make all those people come to a consensus about what the political ideal of the nation, or the empire in that case, should be. The idea of the establishment of Christianity as a religion of the Roman Empire was as a means of control. And it has been used as a means of control ever since. You want to look at Jesus and his teachings, well, they don't really say go torture some rabbis and make sure that they become Christians. I mean, that's what they did during the Crusades. Jesus never said that. No. No, the whole idea of this is Christianity was established as a means of control. So every government since within the entire European range has used Christianity as a crux in order to direct their power and their authority onto anybody they decided that they needed to, or was a positive end result for them. If they needed to invade Africa for their whatever, for their rubber, we gotta convert these guys to Christianity so they'll be on our side. You go over to the New World, all those Native Americans with their bows and arrows, the Indians as they called them, got to convert them to Christianity so they'll be on our side. The whole idea of the establishment, especially of Christianity, has been a power grab in every conceivable way, because in no way has the way that we as a society in the 18th, 19th, 20th century especially have used Christianity as anything other than a weapon.
Excellent points. Strong.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hannah, I believe you were looking to respond to that.
Yeah, well, for this question, it is definitely a hard one. I would love to imagine that it's possible to have a symbiotic existence between these two. However, I don't believe that religious leaders prescribing to political authorities is ever going to be good for all. And what we're looking for is which of these is best for the people. I'd sooner like to modify the first one as possible and say that political authorities should be able to govern religious institutions. Now, I realize that religious institutions will not want this because religious institutions are usually based on a supreme deity as giving them the authority of what is right and true and needed in law. But what's needed for the mass population in order to incorporate a multitude of religions to be able to be governed fairly would be for a governing to happen versus total control or power. I think this has definitely happened in our society, and there's ways through it. There's not necessarily an ideal way for everybody, but there are certainly compromises that can be made to take care of what is the highest necessity.
I'm really glad that you brought up symbiosis there, because that feeds right into the next question. I want to talk about monarchies for a little bit. The theory of divine right, which is a political and religious doctrine in a monarchy, which states that a king or queen is divinely preordained to inherit the crown, asserts that a monarch is inherently not accountable to earthly authority, since theirs is granted by a deity. Does absolute power corrupt absolutely? And if so, does mixing religion and politics in this way leave too risky a potential for power abuse? And I can tell just from the nodding head that Jules would like to jump in on this one.
Oh my God, look at the popes, like in history. Like, just look at them. Look at the Borgias. Holy shit, man. I mean, how corrupt. I mean, there were disputes in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance eras of popes diverting from other popes. So there were two popes at several times in history because of power struggles, because some cardinals thought that one guy should be pope, another thought their others should be a pope. Sometimes they just decided, yeah, no, I'm the pope now. I mean, holy shit, the power of these religious structures is immense, and they hold so much wealth all together, and they hold it and they don't do anything with it, and they continue to not do anything with it. You want to look at the Catholic Church, it's one of the most wealthy organizations. You could call it a
Vatican vault,
state,
man.
even. The Vatican is a city state,
and their vault is one of the most
almost a
important
nation. Yeah, I mean, we don't even know what's in it. There could be so much amazing history, but because maybe it goes against the ideas that they're trying to convey, maybe it disproves some ideas of Jesus as a deity. Maybe if you know, if Jesus was just a dude with some really cool, swell, peaceful ideas, I mean, he's not nearly as persuasive than if he's the son of God, right? And so if you have all these texts that say, you know, Jesus was a swell dude, I mean, paraphrasing, obviously, because who the fuck knows what's in there, but I mean, they're keeping it secret. They're not letting anybody in there. They hold so much wealth in art, in patents, and all this stuff, in antiquities. It's just insane. And our current Pope, at least is a step up in terms of his compassion, because he at least seems to give a shit about people, which is better than many in my lifetime, or at least let's say I've had two. This is the third. You know, it's John Paul II that I grew up hearing about, and then Constantine, and then this guy
Benedict, not Constantine.
ben, sorry, not Constantine, Benedict, and
No,
and now yeah. But man, I mean, religion really has, you know, the religious organizations have really amassed so much wealth, and it does corrupt. I mean, you don't really have to even look very far back in history to see how much it's corrupted. You look at the mega church leaders now. What's his name?
Joel Osteen. There's
yeah,
also
yeah.
Billy Graham.
Yeah, and the guy who apparently let his wife have sex with some dude while he watched, and
Let's
It was
not
the
wander
pool
too
boy.
far.
And they
That's-
were,
that-
yeah.
Their relationship is not part
I mean,
of
there's
this
just
stuff.
like,
Not
but like
relevant.
but I mean, just as per example, I mean, these people like, and somehow it only just came out, even though it's been going on for years. I mean, the amount of power these people have. The guy who said, "Give me your government, you know, your COVID relief checks," and people did. Because they actually thought that he was going to do something with it other than amass his own wealth. All his intent ever was. I mean, of course. I mean, a religious organization these days has just become a system of corruption, unlike the US government.
So,
I think
I
we
don't
were
know,
heading to Kylan next, actually.
okay, yeah, wasn't sure.
So, you know, speaking on monarchies, you know, I can definitely echo Jules' sentiment that, you know, I don't think monarchies have been a good thing. You know, I think monarchies have been led to some of the biggest hoarding of wealth that throughout, you know, in history of mankind. Mention, you know, for me, I see monarchies as symbiotic with today's issues in our own society, which is just class warfare. Uh, monarchies monarchies do nothing but hoard wealth from the lower society and hoard them to their own interests. And honestly, I wouldn't call it class warfare. I would call it class slaughter, because class warfare means that, you know, the other side actually wins battles. But when you look at over the course of history, you know, working people, poor people have been slaughtered. They've been slaughtered by the monarchy, and they're being slaughtered by today's monarchy and oligarchy. Working people are slaughtered by the monarchy of Donald Trump and a Republican Party that hoards wealth to the top 1%. We have a monarchy and oligarchy in this country that actually makes poor people poorer while simultaneously making rich people richer. We have an oligarchy and a monarchy in today's society where the Joel Osteens and some of the richest, most wealthiest people in our country are all within the cloth. You know, recently there was, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he was the crazy looking bastard with the crazy double eyes who talked to a female reporter and literally verbatim said that God said that he needs more money because he needs another private jet. This is what
Are you talking about the guy who looks like the villain from The Mask?
Pretty much, and so this is what we're dealing with when you're talking about, class slaughter and the inherent monopolization of riches and treasure into the hands of wannabe monarchs, past monarchs, and religious institutions that control our politicians, and then politicians that use religious institutions to control the masses, to hoard what? Wealth and power. And so, at the end of the day, you could always break it down to one of two things: who is going to gain or lose power, and who's going to gain or lose riches. And, that's what I equate to monarchy. And, I'll be damned if, I allow monarchy to come into this country. But I'll tell you one thing: the modern GOP and conservative movement is damn sure trying. I think that the modern conservative movement is nothing more than the religious Taliban. They talk about Muslims, they talk about that segment of society, but really you're doing the same thing, using religion to beat people over the head, to persecute people, and to take power. And so I see it nothing more than another form of the Taliban and another form of Al Qaeda. Because now, just like you have ISIS rolling in trucks with guns rolling through the streets of Fallujah, you see conservatives in their trucks armed to the teeth with machine guns rolling through the streets, just the same.
Excellent, Kylan. Very powerful and a little bit daunting. We're gonna jump over to Hannah next, who has some excellent stuff, I'm sure, to bring into this.
So there's two parts to this question. One, does absolute power corrupt absolutely? I'm going to address these separately. So yes, I believe it does, as do all of you so far. People are inherently lazy and prioritize their own wants, needs, and desires before others outside of their own plan. No matter how good someone is in their life or in their intentions, if they don't have an honest system by which to check and balance their own actions, then they will be limited in their own reaches of personal growth. They will not be able to see and support all the people they hold power over if they do not share power with those that live different lives than themselves. And then the second part is, does mixing religion and politics leave too risky a potential for power abuse? Oh boy. So yes, I've been over some of this a little bit earlier in some of my responses. So I think the capstone here that I really just want to say is that a significant issue with, how do I shorten that? A significant issue is that politics and religion is that that laws these people prioritize prohibit equal rights, such as gender inequality, and agency of individuals, such as freedom of and from religion for all people. We need to take care of everybody, not just those that will follow the will of the individuals in charge.
I completely agree. And I think that we run a little bit too much of a risk of in supporting the tribe only that you agree with if we politicize religion. Amanda, you were looking to jump in on this monarchy discussion.
Yeah, so one of the things you mentioned is that a monarch, the concept of the divine right, a monarch not being accountable, so authority is divinely granted. And, there were monarchs in Europe throughout history. He said that they were chosen or appointed by God. There are, the emperor of Japan is considered a living god. The king of Thailand is considered a god, or divinely appointed. And there are many Christians in this country who believe that Donald Trump has been divinely placed in the Oval Office. And and not to take away from the divinity of anybody's or any culture's beliefs, but I'm thinking to myself, like, when did this start, and who decided that somebody was a god or divinely created for this position, or chosen, or who gave them that authority? And the thing I wrote down on my paper was men. Like, I know hashtag not all men, but like this, I hate to be that like feminist, but also I'm not sorry about it. But the patriarchy runs deep in religion, and it runs deep in politics, and it runs deep in monarchies. And it was, we talked about this abuse of power, and this, absolute power does corrupt absolutely, because if the only person or entity that can hold you accountable is one that nobody can really reach, if it's a divine spirit or being, and you are also in control of the way the community receives that type of information, because maybe it's a theocracy, or you're the head of the Church of England, as King Henry VIII was when he started that, so he could get divorced. Like, there is no accountability if you are God, or if you are appointed by God. And when I'm kind of thinking in my mind about the evangelical base that Trump has, a lot of them, I've seen the t-shirts or the memes, like, all right, next Donald Trump Jr. is going to be president, and then Ivanka, and then Eric, and then Barron, like it's
thank you.
freaking monarchy. And it's like, no, well, we fought like a whole war about that, not to have that. And then the fact that they're evangelical Christian, I'm just like, this is idolatry. This is against the 10 Commandments. This is putting, even though they're still saying, Christ is number one, family second, Trump third, or maybe sometimes Trump's second, I don't know. But like, it's still idolatry. They are idolizing him like he is divine and divinely appointed and divinely in that position. And it is being exploited. It's being exploitative on other people. And it's being used as a weapon ideologically. And it's giving people permission to say whatever the hell they want and treat people however the hell they want, even if it's not actually consistent with Christian beliefs, because it's okay that Trump does it. Trump is there because God put him there. The only like logical explanation in my mind as a Catholic of God putting Trump there was, I saw a video of some evangelical Christian who is not a Trump fan, who was like, God put him there to show us how, like, all of our faults and how horrible and wrong we are. But in terms of monarchies, that we may not say this is the king and here's the line of succession, but there are a lot of people in this country who'd like to see that, even if they wouldn't admit that, with how they kind of view Trump and his family.
Absolutely. I think Jules was looking to jump in on this monarchy subject before we move on.
Yeah, I think Amanda brought up Henry VIII as an example of monarchy and the idea of religion just sort of serving the authority. She brought up the patriarchy, and I think there's also one little part that she missed, because it is part of the patriarchy, but it's also about wealth. And it's also about who's allowed to have wealth. And traditionally in Western societies and within the Abrahamic religions, the male is always dominant in terms of their position on the totem pole. Sorry to make metaphors. You get what I mean. So yeah, it's about wealth, but it's also about men with wealth. It's men and wealth. So it's about men. It's also about wealth, men with wealth. And if you have that wealth, then you can declare anything you want, because the monarchy system was established as, just some general or somebody who was able to conquer. In some way, he was charismatic enough to lead his army into battle, and he conquered this region of land, and he said, well, I'm king, and you know why I'm king? I'm king because God said I'm king. Why is that advantageous? Well, because nobody can say you're wrong. I mean, all you have to say is, I spoke to God. God came to me in a dream. He said, I'm king because I am the best person to lead. And that is what monarchy is. It's the idea of this divine power that you have, the divine lineage. So your kids are just as divine as you are, because as long as you declared it, right? And so now we come into modern times, and we have, what, 2 true monarchies left in the world, in Saudi Arabia, and one other place that I'm blanking on. But Saudi Arabia is, of course, the one that comes to mind. They're a true monarchy. It's a theocracy, theocratic monarchy. And their claim is that Allah has given them the geoprudence to rule. And so now we get into Trump, and Trump, as Amanda said, is somebody who a large amount of those evangelical individuals have decided that he is a gift of God. And it does not matter what he does or what he says, because as long as God hasn't ordained him for whatever reason that they have decided, well, so he is the leader. And so this is the power of religion in its most dangerous form. And that is that when you believe so fully that you are right and everybody else is wrong, it creates a system where there is no room for compromise anymore. And there is no room for creating a better system. Things are only as good as they're ever going to be, because we have our Lord and Master. And I think that's the biggest issue with religion in our society today, is it creates zealots. Because, as I said before, Christianity was established as a means of control, and it's continued to be, and that's evolved into this. And I don't see how we get that back at the moment. It's going to take some time.
Excellent points. And honestly, I'm really thrilled with how much fantastic digging in we had for just this one subject. I kind of thought it was going to be a little briefer, and you guys had a lot of really wonderful stuff to say. I want to move really quickly to an excellent question from one of our panelists. Charles has asked, since slavery, when religion was introduced to Blacks, these neighborhoods have been saturated with churches because it is believed to be a way to control the masses. My question is, has televangelists done the same in the evangelical community? And I wanted to pass this question off to Kylan. I'd like to be able to answer.
Yeah, definitely. And so, when you, just for, 30 seconds of context, when you want to control a given population and strip away them to the bone to make them subservient, when the slaves were brought to this country, the first thing they stripped away was their name. And then the next thing they stripped away was their religion and their belief system. And at that point, once they were bare, they were given religion, they were given Christianity as a way to control them and keep them docile and compliant, to say that, yes, you're a slave now, but you're going to be going to heaven afterwards, and you're serving the master who serves God. And absolutely, to Charles' point, the Black people have taken that thought and ran with it for centuries. We are one of the most religious groups in this country. There are Black churches of every denomination, Pentecostal, Baptists, you name it. We yell, we preach, we sing, we dance, and we forgive. And in my opinion, I think in a way that's been detrimental to building up the Black community, because it's kept us compliant and docile. This ever-loving belief that God will take care of everything after, no matter if we've been beaten, no matter if we've been murdered. When cops murder us, praise Jesus, I'm willing to pray. When we're being discriminated, praise Jesus, he'll take care of everything. But he hasn't taken care of everything, because we're still in the same situation. Now, when we talk about the evangelicals and televangelists, absolutely, they've played that same role in poisoning the minds of evangelicals. You know, they preach to them and they give them their money. They make them believe in miracles. You see all the commercials for the miracle spring water. But there actually is one televangelist network that is actually more powerful than the church. And that televangelist network is Fox News. No network has done more to control the minds of a population of the evangelicals than Fox News. They peddle conspiracy, they peddle hate, they peddle garbage, they peddle lies, they peddle deceit, whereas there's literally a separate alternative reality that the evangelicals believe in. And it's to their detriment because they cut their nose to spite their face, but it's also to the detriment of the United States of America and everyone who the evangelicals think that they're superior to, and who they feel that they should be afraid of and be angry at. Evangelicals are more prone to believe that racism is not a problem because they watch Fox News. Evangelicals, when they're polled, they believe more that reverse racism is an actual problem where white evangelicals are under attack more because of Fox News and their televangelists and people like Pat Roberts and everybody else. Evangelicals, when polled, are more apt to believe that if there were to be a dictator, that they would support Donald Trump to be a dictator. And so because to Jules' point that he mentioned earlier, because there's a belief system that he was sent by God. And when we talk about monarchies, one of the things that have monarchies in power is that they're ordained by God and they use that to their advantage. And so, Charles, I hope I answered your question. I absolutely think that the church has been used to placate and keep Black people docile. And I believe the televangelists and Fox News in particular have been the greatest detriment to evangelicals, and they've poisoned their minds.
So I had a brief question for you, Kylan. My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the Black community has been greatly coalesced by its religion. In large Black communities, there are Christian churches that are huge community centers. And as you said, within slavery and past that, the white man did erase the Black man's religion, their heritage, their essence in a lot of ways. But nowadays there's a very large coalition of religious Black leaders, and of course Dr. Martin Luther King was a pastor, and religion was extraordinarily important within that community, and it continues to be. So my question is, how do you bring those two ideas together when you have one side where, yes, it was forced upon you, but now it's become a very important part of the community?
Well, this is just me speaking for myself. And when something is forced upon you, when the roots of an entire belief system were forced upon you, those roots are corrupt. No matter how they are now, those roots are corrupt. And yes, Martin Luther King Jr. did a lot through religion with those belief systems, and that was good. But also Malcolm X was a devout Muslim, and Malcolm X had a totally separate belief system that was based on religion. And I feel that Malcolm X was just as important as Martin Luther King Jr., if not more important. Because
Absolutely.
Right now, what Black people do right now, what we do is we pray and we pray and we pray, and we beg and we beg and we beg. We beg for forgiveness, we beg for rights, we beg to not be killed, and that begging hasn't given us a damn thing. It just gets us killed more. So for me, I feel that the Black community doesn't necessarily need religion. I think we need each other. But I mean, I do recognize that religion is a lot of way that the Black community comes together and I don't knock that. And people have the right to believe whatever they want to believe, and I'm going to believe what I want to believe, and that's fine. But going back to my previous point when we're talking about the church and being oppressed, I couldn't help but I just want to digress for 30 seconds. Amanda brought up a wonderful point that some people want to feel that they're oppressed so bad. Particularly some Caucasians and a lot of evangelicals and conservatives. But conservatives and Republicans are some of the best oppressed people I've ever seen. You control the Supreme Court, you control the presidency, you control the Senate, you control law enforcement, you control the economy, you control religion. You don't get killed by the cops for walking down the street. I mean, they're really good being oppressed. That's some of the best oppression that I've ever seen. And so so reverse racism. I laugh, I scoff at that. I think that's patently ridiculous and false, and it's nothing more than a red herring. So that was my 30 seconds on that.
So Kylan, quick question, yes or no answer. Do you think the Black community would be better off without the Christian community religion?
Yes. And that's just my personal belief, but yes. I think the American government would be better without the Christian religion. I don't just put that to blacks. I put that to the United States of America. I put, that's it.
I'm going to chime in about a little bit about what Kylan was saying and definitely support. So religion has a way of creating, it has a way of not encouraging empirical evidence or critical thinking skills. Not to say that people that follow religion aren't capable of that or don't have that, but the religion that is trying to control the way that they think and feel about the world is limiting their, it's discouraging that capacity. And especially in children, when children grow up in these cultures, it's limiting those children's capacities to grow those really important skills to live and thrive in society. So specifically disadvantaged communities are subject to this so much more heavily because on many fronts, they, just by that name, by that title, disadvantaged, if you grow up in societies or communities that don't have equal rights or are treated unfairly, if you have been subject to being to having racism thrust upon you, then people that are given people that are not given their human rights and needs to thrive are then in a sense working with less capacity to defend themselves against influence that doesn't have their best interests in mind. And we see that significantly in lower income populations, and that I think that disadvantaged communities definitely get the brunt of this because they end up soaking in the extreme availability of religion and holding tight to that because it's giving them hope and it's encouraging faith and some things that tie community together, which definitely helps get through hard times. But it's limiting skills and encouragement to move and grow outside of that environment. It's definitely not giving them tools they need to move outside of it. Yeah, I just wanted to chime in on that part. That it's the people that are subject to this, that it's a crime against them and just likely one of many. And the value of learning how to think empirically and to value evidence and to value critical thinking and to have availability of that from your parents and your community around you is so essential to thriving in this world.
I could not agree enough. Thank you so much for your point there, Hannah. That was exactly how I would have said things. I'd like to shift a little bit forward. We've been talking about monarchies, but we're going to move into early American history. And I want to talk about as the revolution began, the Anglican Church, which we now better know as the Church of England, was actually the second largest denomination within the US colonies. And I'm curious, how do you guys think having a state-sponsored church where the head of the church was literally a king of another country within our country as we went to war with them for our very independence affected the process of separation in church and state?
So am I the only history major in the group?
Duh.
I'm an anthropology major.
Anthropology. Okay. So, so the question essentially boils down to influencing that kind of the American concept of separation of church and state with respect to the fact that we separated ourselves from a monarchy where the king was the head of the church. I think that played a huge part. I think it absolutely played a huge part. You know, people forget, especially people with certain agendas, that the founding fathers were mostly deists. They weren't necessarily specifically Christian. I mean, Thomas Jefferson had a Quran, right? Like they were scholars of, you know, history. They were, you know, they were scholars of different religions. They may have had a general belief in the divine, of God. They may have been raised Christian, but I mean, I think, again, Thomas Jefferson, I think he had a quote about like, the United States is fundamentally not a Christian nation or Christian country. And so I think the fact that, you know, the King of England, King George III, was in their minds such a tyrant in terms of how he was governing them, not giving them the representation, the respect that they felt they deserved as full citizens of England. I think they kind of rebelled against pretty much everything he stood for. You know, this wasn't a revolution that was fought because of genocide or human rights violations. It was fought over money and not being able to vote on taxes. But I think that the founding fathers just wanted nothing to do with the way England was being run in, you know, the American experiment. They wanted freedom of choice. They wanted, you know, again, asterisk for certain people, typically land-owning white men, but they wanted to give people that choice and not have the church. I mean, it's literally in the First Amendment. The government.
That's the very next question.
Establish a religion. It's the Establishment Clause. Like that's where this goes to. I mean, people forget that like the First Amendment wasn't actually written when we, you know, got our independence. This was like probably like a half a generation later in the late 1700s. Like this is something that they were grappling with, and they wanted to make extremely clear, we're nothing like England. I mean, in other ways, we're a lot like England, but particular point,
better cooking.
We're not establishing religion. We literally just separated from a country where the leader of that country is the religion. Like, I think it played a massive part. And that's also why you had such, I think, discord between patriots and loyalists, right? Because it wasn't just loyalty to the king, it was loyalty to the Church of England.
So follow-up question then, given what we just discussed, and that the First Amendment does have the wording, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the exercise thereof, is America a religious country or a country tolerant of religion?
Neither. It's not a religious country in the sense of our founding. It's not a religious country in the sense of our structure of government. You could call the populace religious because they're majority Christian, but I don't think that if we're talking about in the context of the Constitution, in the context of America becoming a nation, America is not a Christian nation.
In the context of the binding agreement that we all are part of, the
yeah,
Declaration of Independence. And
yeah, and so like when we're talking about is America tolerant of religion, I don't think America is tolerant of religion, especially when you get certain people into certain political positions who make the laws, who make the policies, and are not tolerant of other beliefs or religions. You know, I think there are people in certain communities that are tolerant of religions. I mean, you can just look at the founding of the colony of Pennsylvania, where it was like freedom of religion on crack, right? Like William Penn was like, everybody come on in, believe whatever you want or don't, like, we don't care, like, be nice to each other. And that's very different than what we see in America today. We're not tolerant of other religions. We're jerks about other religions. We have a president who wrote an executive order called the Muslim ban in the media and in the community. We've had, other religious minorities who have been discriminated against because, I'm trying. What's coming to mind is Julius and Ethel Rosenberg during the Red Scare. They were Jewish, a Jewish couple, and I think that the anti-Semitism surrounding their prosecution was rooted in the fact that America is not tolerant of other religions and other beliefs in general.
So when I ask that, I mean, not necessarily has it evolved to be or is the population, but with that binding clause in the First Amendment, were they intending for a country tolerant or tolerant of religion, or were they trying to, how do I word this, create like a separation of powers such that divine right couldn't apply here?
So for the kind of first part, with tolerance, I feel like we use that word kind of too loosely. We tolerate a lot of things, even if we don't like them. And so I don't know if tolerate is the right word. Sometimes when we use the word tolerate, it feels like we're just, I'm putting up with something. But in terms of your second part of your question, with the Establishment Clause, what I think they were doing is not necessarily, we have documents and words of the Founding Fathers after the fact where they're like, yes, separation of church and state. But the way I view those two clauses in conjunction is basically do what you want, people. The government's not going to interfere or force you to do something else. It's not tolerance. It's not necessarily like a demarcation line. It's we're not going to establish or endorse, because that's a big part of the First Amendment, endorse any particular religion. And we're not going to prevent you, or rather, we're not allowed to endorse or prevent you from the free exercise of your religion. I don't see that particularly as a separation. I see it as a kind of let it be sort of thing. We're not going to interfere. We're not going to prevent. We're also not going to force. So I don't know if that kind of makes sense.
No, totally. Kylan, I think you were looking to jump in here.
Yeah, one, I pretty much agree with, I'd say like 99.8% of what Amanda said. Like, I wish I could have just broke that down so eloquently. So thank you very much for that. There's definitely not a separation of church and state, especially right now. So like there is no separation of church and state right now. We are living in a Christian theocracy. And, the thing is, what we do right now is the only way that we're a religious country is only when it comes to pro-Christianity. We're not a pro-Muslim country. We're not a pro-Buddhist country. We're not a pro-Buddhist country. We're not a pro-atheist country. Honestly, being an atheist in this country is almost worse than being a Muslim. You're probably more despised. You know, the only laws are now pro-Christian because, you know, laws don't protect Muslims. You know, we spy on them, you know, we call them all terrorists, we terrorize them, people bully them, people commit acts of violence against them, people show you know, hatred against them. You know, but yet, you know, we have, yeah, I'm glad there was not, you know, that, yeah, there hasn't been any hate crimes against atheists, thank goodness, because most atheists are really quiet, hopefully. You know, but with them is, with Christians, everything is designed to protect them. We have courts that say, you know, and a government right now that says, you know, the word freedom has been corrupted. You know, my freedom of religion is not really freedom to practice my religion and you free to practice your religion. Nowadays, freedom of religion is, if I can't practice my religion by oppressing you, then you're oppressing my religion. You know, if I can't deny you the right to bake a cake, then you're oppressing me. If I can't use my conscience to deny an abortion, then you're violating my rights. If I can't use my rights to deny this gay couple to adopt a child, you're violating my rights. And so it's only a pro-Christian nation, and laws and power are only for pro-Christian causes, because any other belief system are oppressed. And that, in my mind, is not separation of church and state, because these aren't just individuals doing this because they can. Individuals are doing this because they can, because they're being endorsed by our own government, by the federal government, by the state government, by local government. And so, yeah, so that's the point I wanted to make on that.
Hannah, please jump in.
I just wanted to share a bit about this Christian nation. I'm totally in support of what Kylan was saying. But that, just to bring up this factor that the evangelical Christian mass community in our country are determined to see America as, to see God as impartial, as partial to America. They basically believe that America is the place that Jesus will come back to and return. And if God were to choose a place in the world to send Jesus when he returns, that by God, it's going to be America. When a group of people believes steadfastly in their own superiority, whether that have to be nationalistic or based on religion or race or whichever, they are not going to give space and freedom and acknowledgement to the people that have just as much of a right to claim that as they do. So I definitely agree that that Christianity is deep rooted into our country down to the foundation. And we're essentially asking the foundation of our country to separate from that and to be unbiased in the way that they distribute care and acknowledgement to different groups of people from different religions or non-religions. And it's like asking somebody in power to give up their power. We're begging with the rich to give up trillions or billions or thousands of dollars to help starving people in this country. It's the same thing with people in absolute power holding control over religion and laws. Like, anybody that believes that they are following a belief structure that is superior, it doesn't matter how good they feel about other groups of people, or how much they want to share an acknowledgement that people believe differently. They still believe those other people are believing wrong. And it's a very troubling and difficult situation, because I mean, the alternatives: kick them out, overthrow, beat them upside the head. Do you not see that you're stepping on everybody else to get where you want to be? Basically, what gives someone the right to ordain religious beliefs over non-religious people as well? there's no space for that in a population that is as diverse as we are.
Thank you for saying that. Excellent. Amanda, you were looking to jump in here.
Yeah, so I completely agree with Hannah on that, and also something Kylan mentioned. The pushing of your religious beliefs on other people under the guise of saying I'm exercising my religion by denying you something. It's funny to me because I like to call myself a render unto Caesar Catholic. So there's,
can you say that again?
Render unto Caesar Catholic. I practiced that earlier, and it's like politicization. So for those who are unfamiliar, there's basically a story in the Bible, a parable or an anecdote about Jesus, where he is challenged, I think, by the Pharisees, because they're like, he's this like radical lefty socialist guy. He's a political threat. We don't like him. He's causing trouble. We're going to try to make him say something against the state, against Rome. So they ask him basically like, yo, Jesus, should we pay our taxes? Should we? Or should we give it to like the temple? And he says, render or give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto God what is God's. And I take that as there is space in religious life for recognition of the secular versus the church or the belief, and they are not necessarily diametrically opposed. Like, this was a gotcha question posed to Jesus. It was, we're gonna get it. He's gonna say something blasphemous, like he's going down, he's done. And he flips it on them and he's like, I'm not saying you shouldn't pay your taxes. I'm just saying, like, give him what belongs to him, what he asked for, and give this to God. And so when I look and I see Christians who want to rise up in politics and they want to impose their beliefs on other people, and they want to demand adherence to their beliefs for people who don't share those beliefs, I'm like, I mean, we talk a lot about like, what would Jesus do? That's not what Jesus would do. He would recognize like, okay, yeah, we're not going to establish a religion as part of the state. Like that's what I think. I think he would be like, no, we're good. We don't need to do that. And it's, the pushing of religion on other people is, I think, sometimes almost backfires, because a lot of times you have, these movements to, put the 10 Commandments outside of the State House or a cross or something. And, it's our right. We have the right to do this. And then those same people get mad when the Church of Satan wants to put up their own statue outside of the Arkansas State House or the Illinois State House. I think Kylan was right on the money that it's about Christianity first, when that's not what it's supposed to be. It's just this weird level of hypocrisy, because Jesus wouldn't say, I'm not baking you a cake because you're having gay marriage or something that I never actually talked about. But it's just hypocrisy, because those same people are going to say, oh, you're in your second marriage? Yeah, I'll totally make you a cake for that wedding. Even though under more strict Christian beliefs, a second marriage is adultery unless you're a widow or a widower. It's just a lot of hypocrisy just overall. And I feel like, so Kylan said something earlier about how America would be better off without the Christian religion. And I agree, in the sense of, if we look at what the Christian religion has been used as a weapon to accomplish, the harm that it has caused to a lot of people in the pursuit of imposing Christian beliefs on a populace that is not entirely Christian. But I think that there are ways that people of faith could use their faith in a more compassionate and better way. So early on in his little presidential run, Pete Buttigieg was talking about how he's a Methodist and he doesn't understand why, or agree with the fact that the right has a monopoly on faith. And I agree with that. I think it's like ridiculous that, for example, it's a controversial position to think that Black Lives Matter. There is
No, it's not.
It's not. I agree with you.
It's not.
For some people, it is. And it's like those same people are often Christians, and they forget that there is a passage in the Bible about sheep, a flock of sheep, and there's one that's missing. And it's not like, well, what about the rest of us? It's like, no, we need to go help this one right now. This is the one that's in trouble. This is the one that's hurting. It's just, there's so many things that they push that are not actually in line with what they claim to believe. And if they really wanted to like do some good, instead of stopping people from making their own choices about their own bodies and their own lives and who they choose to marry or love in a secular society, they could be like Sister Helen Prejean, who is a nun who is an anti-death penalty advocate. You know, they could be like, I'm going to butcher his name, I think it's Martin Gugino, the elderly gentleman in Buffalo at one of the BLM protests who was assaulted by police officers and ended up with traumatic brain injury. He is a ardent Catholic. He is an activist. He is somebody who really is like down for the cause and marginalized people and using his white privilege for good and his belief in, you know, Christian tenets for good. It's, you know, advocating for asylum seekers. It's, I'm going to toot my own horn, being a public defender. For me, that was a very, a decision very much based in my religious beliefs, because I am like, I won't go into all of it, but I view it as why I was put on this earth, to be an advocate for the poor and to fight for people who don't have a voice. And imagine, just imagine if we had more people in power with that perspective. So
They really believe that? That would be amazing.
I may have gotten off topic. I don't know.
That's okay. Jules, you've been patient and sitting there for a little while. Why don't you jump in? Love to hear what you have to say here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we should not be forgetful of the fact that Jesus, if he existed as a man, he was Middle Eastern. He was not a white man. That was a idea put forth in mostly Renaissance art. He was not blonde. He likely looked like a man from southern Greece or Morocco. He was ethnic. He was an ethnic guy. He was born a Jew, and he remained a Jew his entire life. He was never not a Jewish man. You know, in the Bible, he goes off and he says, "I'm going to go find myself." You know, quote, not quote, but and then there's 12 years missing. Like, what did he do? Who knows? And clearly I mean, it seems pretty obvious to me that he went off into the desert. He went out into India, into China. He learned ideas of Hinduism and Buddhism, because a lot of what Jesus's teachings within the Bible are very Eastern influenced. And then you look at what people are saying in modern era, in the right-wing zeitgeist of people who are defending their beliefs based off of their belief in Jesus. So he does not tolerate the gays, and it's like, well, actually, that's all Old Testament stuff. That's not, and that Jesus as a man, as a person, would have agreed with. I mean, he's a guy who saw a market full of people being greedy and rode in on a donkey and beat the crap out of everybody. I mean, it's because you're not being pious. You're not being with God. You're not being in any way part of a solution to people being prosperous in any way. And the idea of Jesus as a person was even within the Bible. You just read the New Testament, the accounts of Jesus he really loved people. He believed that people could be better. He believed that people could rise up. He believed that disease could be cured. He believed that rampant capitalism was bad, because he literally dismantled an entire market that was just full of greed on the principle that it was just greed. And so now we have this evangelical faction that has decided to pick and choose out of various pieces of the Bible. Oh, we don't like the gays, it makes us uncomfortable. And oh, here's a passage where it says a man should not lie down with another man. But if you look at that passage and then you look directly under that passage, it gives specific instructions on how to sell your daughter into slavery. That's not really acknowledged. And the hypocrisy of it is that all these people who claim to be pious, they claim to be religious. No, they just want they want to be validated within their own belief system. They feel something makes them uncomfortable, and so they find a passage in the Bible that can validate that idea within themselves. And now we're in a situation where 70% of the country does not want Roe v. Wade overturned, but the Trump administration is going to put in a justice into the Supreme Court who will almost certainly overturn that, regardless of overwhelming majority of people who don't want that, simply to appease a small faction of their base that says this is not what I like, and it's religious reason. It's not scientific necessarily. It's moral, but it's religiously moral. So only their opinion matters, apparently.
Yeah. So I, when you started talking about blonde, blue-eyed, white Republican Jesus, I was thinking about how frustrated I am that the right or the current Republican Party has pretty much hijacked Jesus. They've painted him in a certain light, and even in that light, they don't follow what they claim he stands for. But they also, I think, really forget who he was. He wasn't just, this all-loving, peaceful guy who, despite the fact that he's a Jewish man and abortion is totally a thing in Judaism and in Jewish culture, it's allowed, suddenly is all, going to be anti-abortion for the babies, right? And in reality, I like to joke that Jesus was the original social justice warrior. He was, somebody who was extremely passionate about doing the right thing. And if you were doing the wrong thing, he would get upset. I mean, the parable or the tale about him that comes to mind is, when he overthrew the tables of the money changers in the temple. Peaceful Jesus,
Yeah, that's what
is like flipping tables. Like they've just completely hijacked who he was. I always joke, like, he's the socialist radical left, and they've completely hijacked him, and in other ways that they've hijacked the Bible for political purposes. And it's frustrating because obviously we have the benefit of hindsight in history, and I'll admit I drink the Kool-Aid. I still identify as a Catholic, but I was definitely one of those people who was like, I'm pro-life, I believe in abstinence, like I taught youth group, like I was that person. And it's interesting to me because as I started to learn more, I realized how much has been warped, and people forget that in a lot, at least for the Catholic side of things, the interpretation of when life begins was not always, hey, life begins at conception. That it was originally life is at first breath. And there are lots of Bible passages about the breath of life. When did it change? It changed when women started getting more rights, more autonomy, more agency in their sex lives, in their rights in society in general, the sexual revolution, the women's liberation movement, the civil rights movement. That's really when you started seeing a change in those belief systems, not just with Catholics, but also with non-denominational Christians. And that then, because they were mostly in the seats of power, changed how the laws and the policies around these things were being structured and enforced. And it just makes me really frustrated because they did the same thing with the LGBTQ community. Obviously there are lots of documented instances throughout history of same-sex relationships, whether they are monogamous or not monogamous, or Sparta or ancient Greece. And if this were something that Jesus cared enough about to say he doesn't want, he would have said it. And it only changes when you have people in power who decide they don't like it. And then they say, oh, this thing that was really just about male prostitution and priests in Leviticus, we're going to say that's for all men. Men cannot lie with men. It's about it feels like an intentional misinterpretation of the text. And that kind of brings me to another thing that I often think, if you really think about it, of the three, what I'm going to say, major world religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, Christianity is basically the only one where the text has been translated outside of its original language or languages. And it's been translated into so many different languages. There's so many different interpretations. And that's why I think you see so much conflict with trying to impose policy based on that. And it's another reason why we need to do as much as we can to make sure that people don't end up in those powerful positions. And, I think Jules mentioned the likely Supreme Court pick, Amy Coney Barrett. Like, I may be Catholic, but I would rather not have her deciding what my rights are. It's, it's very frustrating.
So, thank you. Some really fantastic points, and I'm not used to being the moderator, and I want to jump in and say all my points, but I think we should stick to the plan. And I'd like to direct this next question to Hannah. Should politicians, we're talking within America, should politicians be motivated by religion or use religion as a tool for political gain? And as a sub-question to that, how do you perceive the balance between orthopraxy and orthodoxy in American politics today?
Do we want to define those terms first?
Would you like to do? We can absolutely define them. Amanda, would you like to jump in and do that real quick?
Yeah, so I'm going to just kind of basically go on just very simple. So we hear a lot about, someone's an Orthodox Christian or an Orthodox Jew or Orthodox anything. And what that basically means is an emphasis on correct belief and correct rituals and correct religious practice. Orthopraxy is different. That's about, what you're doing, the practical conduct. An example of this from the Christianity umbrella is you will often hear Catholics talk about salvation and faith through good works and deeds. That's orthopraxy. Whereas evangelical Christians, non-denominational Christians, they believe in faith and salvation by grace, by faith, by mere belief, by merely proclaiming that Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior, that you are saved, therefore you are going, you have a path to heaven by that belief. And that's an example of orthodoxy.
So would it be more about ethics versus practice then?
It can be, yeah, absolutely, because then you end up
So
with,
like orthopraxy would be about having good ethics, and
yeah, that's
orthodoxy would
definitely
be about
part of it.
having good,
That's
okay, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
All right, Hannah, with that definition in place, is there anything you'd like to add to the definition to help bolster your point?
Nope, that definition is what I had. That orthopraxy is how a believer acts, and orthodoxy is what a person believes. So it's a little bit weird to organize, because the question for that is how do you perceive the balance between orthopraxy and orthodoxy in American politics? I want to put that on hold. Should politicians be motivated by religion or use religion as a tool for political gain? So there's problems with both of these. Politicians that are motivated by religion first. So when a person is motivated by religion, to me, that sounds like they hold within them their own convictions about religion, about their belief systems regarding it, and like that's their motivation. They want the goals of their religion or of religion itself to be amplified, more highly valued, or what have you. I think that type of person has a lot more capacity to enact power because they have their conviction behind it. They have their heart pumping through. They will not just back down if the odds aren't in their favor. They're going to keep going all the way.
Divine inspiration, almost.
Yeah. The other side is or use religion as a tool for political gain. So this reminds me of when I used to go to a Methodist church way back when. I would talk with youth in the youth group there about stuff, and it was very obvious to me that they were there because their parents said for them to be there, and they were there because that was the thing to do, and their parents tended to act that way as well. Just the particular Methodist church I went to, not necessarily all of them, but that compared to non-denominational churches that I had been to was vastly different. The non-denominational churches, people tended to be there because they had the inspiration in themselves to do it, and even the kids had this desire to want to be involved and believe it themselves. So I think with this latter part, the use religion as a tool for political gain, I think that also has significant harm potential, because if someone is recognizing a power available and that people are subject to being used, controlled, manipulated, they see a place of power available to step in on, they can totally go with the rights, the actions, the ways that the religion stipulates things need to be, and use that as stepping grounds to get where they want to go in their politics. So in that one, the concern is, well, it's about that person's personal morality and what they're willing to do to get what they want. And then the other, it's about their personal conviction, and if they are really willing to take their beliefs all the way. I think both are significantly problematic. So no, I don't believe they should be involved in that way. I think there's ways to represent people of religious faiths and to support their freedom to practice their faith without going into extremes of either of those two. The second part about orthodoxy, I may not even really be ready to answer that. If anybody else wants to jump in, please feel free.
I could reword it if you like.
Sure.
So do you see American politicians as more honestly practicing their religion, or as more going by the, I said I believe in God, therefore I'm saved, and inspired and powerful because God supports me. More in practice or more in image. Amanda, you can also feel free to jump in afterwards.
I think politicians that act on orthopraxy, how the believer acts, I mean, it will be very evident based on their actions in politics that if they're taking actions in that direction, that is, if they're motivated by their conviction, or if they're motivated by what the power lineup is, by what the religion says to do. Like it depends on their motivation as to why they take certain actions. And as far as politicians that move based on their beliefs, I definitely see that all over the place. People believe all sorts of things outside of religion. They take action on in politics. Yeah, definitely not limited to religion.
So that was admittedly a bit of a four-part question, and I really appreciate that you took the time to break it into its constituent parts and respond to them. Jules, I think you were looking to get in on this as well.
Sorry,
you're muted.
I was
There you
muted. So there, to a degree, I think that being a politician is inherently dishonest. I think there is always a aspect of dishonesty, because if you are a politician, you're looking to get elected, and you have to say things that you don't necessarily mean. To that, I think there are lots of politicians who will gladly use religion as an idea in order to get other people on their side. I don't think that necessarily means that they don't believe the religious aspects of the things they're saying, but I do think that they will use whatever they can in order to persuade the constituency that they are trying to represent that they are the best person for the job.
I would agree.
So yeah, I think that there's an inherent dishonesty in trying to become a politician. I think you can't really try and run for office and not be dishonest to some degree. And I think it's hard, when you are a religious individual, to say like, this is what I believe, but my constituency, the people who are voting, well, they believe something slightly different, so I'm going to have to adhere to that, even if I don't quite believe what they're saying. And I think that's actually one of the most inherent problems in our system within politics and religion, is that everybody is trying to propagate themselves to a specific group of people that they know will help them win. And then that becomes a greed factor. They're trying to keep winning, especially when you don't have term limits in the Senate and the House. They're going to constantly try to appeal to this group of people, because these are the groups of people who are going to get them reelected no matter what. And I think that's part of the reason we should have term limits for the Senate and the House. I think that trying to appeal to this one constituency of people has actually been one of the biggest issues in our government. And the religious aspect of it is that the conservatives have been reliant on evangelicals, even though they're a minority group of people within the American populace. But they're reliant on them. They can't win without them, and they can't win without doing other things that are very dishonest as well, and they know it, and they keep doing those dishonest things, and they're going to continue to do those dishonest things unless somebody says like, well, you can't do this anymore. So I think it's an issue of within our government making a religion this all important thing, when it's actually by statistics becoming a less important thing. because more and more people are abandoning religion now more than ever. And I think certain parties understand that they aren't going to be able to win in the future if they don't keep cheating and they don't keep propagating to a certain group of people.
So when I think of kind of orthopraxy versus orthodoxy, right conduct versus right belief, and how it interacts with or is part of our political process, I basically view a lot of our politicians who go up there and say, I'm Christian, I'm this, I kind of view them as just giving lip service. And again, this is from, you know, the Catholic perspective, where we focus more on the conduct on the orthopraxy part of things. But I feel like there are a lot of politicians, and we've talked about this before, where it's just they lead very hypocritical lives versus what they show the public. And then, you know, I'm a big believer that whatever your belief system is, whether it's religious, whether it's your values, your morals, it doesn't have to be religion, but whatever it is, you show that through your actions and how you treat people and the choices you make versus what you say. And that's kind of my biggest beef with a lot of evangelical Christians and politicians who push religious points of view and push policies and laws based on religion, because, you know, they're not practicing what they preach a lot of times in their home life, and they're not showing through their own actions in their life what they believe. In terms of pushing a religion for a personal agenda or to get someone on their side, one of the things I was just thinking of is how early Christianity took over, co-opted, hijacked a lot of indigenous European belief systems to form a major part of the life of Jesus in terms of what people believe, and that's Christmas. You have, they took over Saturnalia from the Romans. They adopted symbolism from the Sami people, the indigenous people in Scandinavia, and a lot of the traditions of the Druids in Germany were adopted for the iconography, the Christmas tree, the presents, the ornaments. Santa Claus is, you know, an indigenous person from Scandinavia, basically, and in terms of how he's depicted in a lot of early imagery. And none of that was in, you know, an accident. It was all intentional. It was political leaders, monarchies, Constantine types who were like, if we want these people to be under our control and under our power, we need to make them think that we are one of them. Oh yeah, our God was also born on the same day your God was. Come, let's have our Christmas party instead of our feast of Saturnalia. And we see that a lot of times now in modern times with politicians saying something to get people on their side, even if they don't believe it. And just kind of finish off my point, which largely is about this lip service. I'm actually going to pull up an actual Bible quote. And this is something that I personally think applies to everything from street preachers to politicians. And it's Matthew 6. This is the version of the Bible I'm reading from is from the New International Version, because again, there's different versions with different translations. But this basically says, be careful not to do your acts of righteousness before men to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with triumphs, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honored by men. I tell you the truth, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by men. I tell you the truth, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And so that's something that whenever I see a politician talking about their religion in a way that is informing their policies or their votes or how they campaign, I see hypocrites. When I see it's Trump holding a Bible in Lafayette Square. That's what it is. It's to be seen. It's to have people know what you believe, as opposed to showing them by their actions. You guys know me well, those on this panel, that I am fairly critical of presidential candidate and Vice President Joe Biden. But a lot of people don't know that he is a devout Catholic and he doesn't talk about it. And I think that is something that goes to his kind of character. And there are a lot of politicians in the Democratic Party who similarly are very religious, but don't make it a part of their public persona, their character, in terms of the caricature of a politician. And I think that if we had more politicians who had the reins of power, who were not pushing their religion on people like that, not being hypocrites, that our country and our society would be in a better place.
Excellent, Amanda. I have to agree very strongly with that final point you made. To wrap it up tonight, because we have gotten through all of the questions that I had prepared, I think we're going to take one last question from one of our viewers, and I'm going to hand that over to Hannah to read and answer.
Sure. So we had a question from Benjamin Roth. He said, what are your thoughts on integral theory? So I am new to this term, and I'm not sure about the rest of the panelists, but I'm going to go ahead and read a couple definitions just so we're on the same page. First one's from Wikipedia, another one's from elsewhere. So this one is, integral theory is Ken Wilber's attempt to place a wide diversity of theories, thinkers, into one single framework. It is portrayed as the theory of everything, trying to draw together an already existing number of separate paradigms into an interrelated network of approaches that are mutually enriching. I think that's a pretty solid definition, but I did see this other one that is worth saying. Integral theory is a school of philosophy that seeks to integrate all of human wisdom into a new emergent worldview that is able to accommodate the gifts of all previous worldviews, including those which have been historically at odds, such as science and religion, Eastern and Western schools of thought, and pre-modern, modern, and postmodern worldviews. Thank you so much, Benjamin, for asking this question. I did not know that term, and I'm glad to know it now.
Same.
I think this definition kind of screams at something that I've thought myself of. I'm really into let's bring together all of the experts in all the different things that are important in this world. And the equivalent of a round table, value those perspectives for what they hold, sacred knowledge of, and use that to craft our, Earth-sized worldview, next steps of what we're going to do with our time here. I think that would greatly value the deep history that we have, and be able to use, those different perspectives towards the betterment of everybody. I imagine that would be quite an undertaking to compile those people, and that of course those people would need to be, switched out in term limits and such. But I'm definitely up for not throwing away old world knowledge. All of the things that we've learned and lived through in the past brought us to the point that we are today. And a lot of what our needs are is to remember how much we have evolved through, how much we have grown with, and see that movement of the development of our conscious thought and what we see as needed in this next phase of our existence in humanity. I don't know much about the subject or the particular person that coined this theory, so I can't speak directly to him, but I think he's on a good track here as far as valuing the theories of everything.
So I know I said that we were going to wrap it up with that last question, but I didn't know what integral theory meant. And given the new founding understanding, we had another comment from another viewer that I think fits in really well. So I want to thank you again, Benjamin, for bringing that up, because I learned something new and that's fantastic. I love that. Deva said, our ignorance of the cosmos is too vast to commit to atheism, and yet we know too much to commit to a particular religion. A third position, agnosticism, is often an uninteresting stance in which a person simply questions whether his traditional religious story, say a man with a beard on a cloud, is true or not true. But with possibilianism, I'm hoping to define a new position, one that emphasizes the exploration of new, unconsidered possibilities. Possibilianism is comfortable holding multiple ideas in mind and is not interested in committing to any particular story. I really like the concept of possibilianism. I personally rail against cognitive dissonance and those uncomfortable states of mind left and right. And when we can find a good way to have something utilize and accept more than one idea, I think we've had a really good step forward. Amanda would like to jump in real quick and say something, but we are going to wrap it up.
This would be a really good place to end, but I was thinking about the fact that David mentioned the cosmos, and it's too vast to commit to atheism. And again, I'm a weird Catholic who believes in and loves science, and it just like blows my mind how many Christians are like, the Earth is 6,000 years old, or aliens don't exist, or can't exist, or evolution isn't real. And I'm like, how the fuck do you know? Pardon my French. Like, there's so many possibilities. And if you are going to say that you believe in a deity, whether it's a Christian deity or not, that is all powerful, how dare you? Who are you to limit that being? I believe in the possibility of life on other planets. Like, otherwise God's boring. Like, why are we like if you're all powerful, you're all creative. If you're all powerful, there are endless possibilities. So yeah.
Thank you, Amanda. And with that, we are done with yet another mini podcast. Thank you all for sitting with me through this excellent conversation. To our viewers, we've had such fantastic interactions with you, and it's always so fun to do. I said mini podcast because we had less participants, not a shorter podcast. I personally think this worked out beautifully, and I look forward to doing this again with you guys soon. Once again, if you viewed this, if you liked what we did, like and subscribe, share. We have a lot of fun doing this, but it's also real fun to see viewers and get all the comments. So show us your support. Thank you.
Thanks. This is awesome.